Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I think is our first ever webinar at Oak Hills. So we're excited about this. We had a great response. I think there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 people who registered for this, which means there's a lot more probably watching, and we're very glad that you are. Tonight, we are going to have a conversation about racism, kind of in this format that we refer to around here sometimes as let's pull up a chair and talk about, and tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about racism. We play it off of a sermon series we did a while back of the same name, where we tried to wade into some of the difficult and contentious topics of our time, and we encourage people to have face-to-face, in-person dialogue about difficult and challenging issues and see if through the course of talking and sharing things could progress. And so Sharon and I are going to do that tonight, and we are very excited, and we have a great opportunity tonight to listen and learn from our friend Sharon Richards. So welcome, Sharon, to this occasion. Sharon's also an elder in our church, and so we're looking forward to this conversation about racism. And it's the beginning, it's actually the continuation of a discussion we've been having for a long time. It's going to be a conversation we'll continue to have in the future. So my encouragement throughout this is to relax, to listen. There's no quick fixes to this massive social evil and sin. We're not trying to pretend there is a quick fix. We just want to walk into the discussion again tonight. Back on June 28th, Sharon and I had a conversation in one of our Sunday services. Many of you maybe had a chance to watch that and participate in that, just to kind of set the tone for what's going to happen here tonight. This conversation tonight is purposefully designed to move deeper into this important topic than we did on June 28th. What that means is we're purposefully trying to stir things up a little bit, to talk at a deeper level, to press into this issue as directly as we can and as authentically as we can. And just to kind of give you a heads up, I won't be surprised if many of us here tonight, as we sit and listen and process this, I won't be surprised if you experience or feel at times defensive. That's probably likely. You may have other reactions to what is being said. I imagine you will. But as we often say at Oak Hills, things like defensiveness and these flash reactions we sometimes have to things are really opportunities for us as individual Christians, and maybe even more importantly, as a Christian community, as Oak Hills Church. These are opportunities for us to spiritually grow. When we feel that defensiveness or whatever that reaction, to hold that, to stay in that, and to ask God what he's teaching us about ourselves in that. As Jesus said many times, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. Let them listen. Let them be present in the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. I'm hoping that we can do that tonight. And again, to kind of just sit in the defensiveness if it's there and sit in the reaction. I think we all agree that our nation has plenty of yelling and screaming and vitriol and defensiveness and anger and name calling. We have enough to last several decades. And we as followers of Jesus have a calling and a responsibility to a different and better way to enter into this in the way of Jesus's kingdom. So we hope to do that tonight, and we invite you to do that along with us. So we're going to go for about 2 hours, unless it goes longer. We'll see what happens, but probably end up cutting it off at 9 o'clock if we're not done by then, just to be respectful of everyone's time. So thanks, Sharon, for being here, and you have some opening remarks you want to share.
Well, I just wanted to say that I appreciate that Oak Hills is a church that is willing to go into these kind of dark, murky conversations. And if you didn't view the June 28th service, I hope you'll go back and do that. And I hope you'll hear my heart in this, is that, our rally cry is that we are Christ followers. And in the midst of all of this mess that we're experiencing in our country and throughout the world, I just really can't say this enough. Our calling as Christ followers is to be peacemakers and shalom, makers, agents of shalom, I should say. So my hope, even though there will be things that I'm sure I'll say that will make some people uncomfortable, I hope I have enough credibility with many of you that you'll hear my heart behind this, that I want to have these discussions so that we can be better Christ followers and we can try to make a difference in our community and beyond, and to be unafraid of difficult conversations and be okay with being uncomfortable and thinking the best of people and their intentions, at least thinking the best of me and my intentions in some of the things that may hit you the wrong way.
Good. So it was pretty remarkable the response people had to this and the number of questions we received. We received probably more questions than we will have time to cover tonight. It was a great response, many, many good questions, and we've tried to include, like I said, as many of them as possible. And so there are hard questions here. There are questions that perhaps some people will even find the question offensive. My job is to ask the questions. My job occasionally, if it seems right, is to ask follow-up questions. My job is even sometimes to raise related issues to the topic we're discussing that might seem silly or might seem offensive. But like I said, we're going to try to press into this as authentically as we can and as deeply as possible. So there were a number of common questions that were submitted. A number of people kind of had the same question. So what we're going to do is start off with some of those. And none of these will probably be all that surprising to people because they are some of the questions that are being asked. So Sharon, let's jump in. And this phrase white privilege is out there and it's talked about a lot. And so what is white privilege from your perspective?
So I know that the words white privilege are a trigger word for many people. And let me just try and break it down because I know there are people going, well, I'm not privileged and all of that. But I'm going to give you some examples of what white privilege can be. And there are many, but I'm just going to kind of give you some for you to think about. First of all, privilege, white privilege is a built-in advantage. It's when you think something is not your problem because it's not a problem for you personally. I want to repeat that. White privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem for you personally. So let me give you some examples of that. And I'm going to go slow so you can kind of hear my words before I go on to the next one. White privilege means that if you need to move, you can live anywhere. It means that there are no negative stereotypes associated with you. It means that you feel for some reason that you should have the final word on race matters. It means that you can go for a run at 1 o'clock in the afternoon without concern of getting shot. It means you can walk into your own apartment building without anyone questioning what you're doing there. It means that you can take a swim in the swimming pool of your apartment building without having someone call the cops on you. It means you can wear anything you want, even a hoodie, without fearing for your life. It means not having to worry about your name, your hair, your skin color as being a factor in any kinds of decisions that are being made. It means that you don't have to have conversations about race in your homes. It means that beauty standards center around you. It means that you as a white person can feel and even deny that racism even exists. It means that people don't make assumptions about your intelligence because of your race. And it means that you can say you're tired of talking about racism.
So take that, just expand on that last one for a second. You said a couple things that kind of the idea that along the lines of you can conclude it's why are we still talking about this, or can you just stretch that out a little more and expand on when you say someone thinks white privilege gives you the luxury of wanting to end the conversation? Explain that a little more.
Well, I mean, there are many white people who can live their lives and not see it because they don't enter into those neighborhoods or those areas, or but this is my life. It's not like I can deny that it's happening, or it happens to me or my son or my parents or whatever. So you can live a life that is such in a bubble that you are not even aware that racism exists. But that, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And frankly, I wouldn't expect white people to even get it because you've never had to. And that is a privilege.
Okay. All right. So another idea, another concept that is, you mentioned this trigger phrase that kind of gets people going. And certainly this next question and the subject matter of it is in that category. So help us understand the emotion behind the idea of Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter.
Yeah, so when people are saying hashtag Black Lives Matter, we are not saying that all lives don't matter. We're not discounting the value of other lives. And what we're saying, though, is that Black lives matter in light of all of the things that have been happening to Black people unjustly.
And okay, so I know that one of the questions people have related to this has to do with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Okay, so unfortunately, this hashtag Black Lives Matters gets mushed into Black Lives Matter, the entity, the organization. And those really are two separate things. Unfortunately, people glomp them together, but I want you to know that Black Lives Matter, the entity, has a whole different kind of what they're all about. And that is separate from this idea of we have to value Black lives in America and throughout the world as well.
And so it's important as we think about these concepts because to keep them separate, not to get drawn to.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So I know that is confusing for a lot of people. And so when they see Black Lives Matter, they think about some of the things that are happening with the entity. That makes them angry. That makes them throw out, the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. And so I would just say those are two different things.
Okay. All right. So one of the questions that was submitted had a fairly lengthy lead-in to it. And I'm going to read this lead-in in part because it's an authentic piece of writing from someone who submitted a question. I think it opens up a lot of the subsequent questions we're going to talk about. It kind of touches on those and at least provides a foundation for it. And I think in many ways it gives a little bit of the narrative in some of our minds, white people's minds, some white people's minds. I think this helps to give words to the narrative that some people have. So I'm going to read this, and then out of this, we'll continue with some more questions. I'd like to start by separating individual racist acts, which I believe we can all agree are abhorrent and sinful, from systemic racial dynamics. My observation of the recent buzz that has dominated the news cycle since the murder of George Floyd has been about systemic racial oppression and inequities. The basic argument, as I understand it, is that Black Americans have been disadvantaged over the course of several generations through both legal and economic inequalities, and as a result, the Black community is stuck in a cycle that they're unable to break from without the aid of new systemic advantages over the general population. Advantages like affirmative action, economic assistance, and reparations, all government solutions. For myself, I don't believe that there are any remaining legal inequalities between our races, and I am skeptical of the claims that I have a systemic advantage over any minority community. In fact, I would argue that I have suffered from reverse discrimination and haven't received the benefit of access to a wide variety of government aid and programs and employment benefits that minorities are entitled to. As a kingdom citizen first, small government conservative who grew up extremely poor and without access to many of the benefits and advantages that people assume white males are entitled to, I'm convinced that any lasting change will need to occur first in individuals, then flow into communities. So out of that, talk about systemic racism, what it is, some examples of it.
Okay, I want to just address what he said. There was one part where you talked about advantages over the general population. Right. And listen, I'm one Black person with one point of view, but I don't feel that we are looking for any advantage over the general population. What we're looking for is an equitable situation here. So, so that was one thing. And then the other thing was about whether lasting change will need to occur in individuals and then flow naturally into communities. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing as Christ followers. It needs to begin with us. So I'm in agreement with that part of the statement.
So let me jump back to the thing you said. So the phrase was unable to break from without the aid of new systemic advantages over the general population, things like affirmative action, economic assistance, and reparations. If I hear what you're saying, your point is it's not that Black people are looking for advantages over the general population, correct, but the leveling of the field.
Correct, a leveling of the field.
Okay.
So when I think, and I know that this is an issue for many about the systemic racism and whether it's real or not, I feel that there are certainly policies and institutions that create certain obstacles for people of color that we have to kind of contend with. And I will agree that it can be a cyclical. And so I have a couple of things that I want to just kind of read that one system overlaps another, and it becomes almost this domino effect where, where you live, say, impacts where you're going to go to school. And where you go to school can impact the quality of the education that you receive. Where you live impacts, for some, access to voting. Where you live is dependent, of course, upon what you can afford. And what you can afford depends on the kind of job or wealth that you have. And so what kind of job or wealth you have will determine your access to healthcare. It can also determine the kind of job you have depending on the education that you receive. So where you live, while perhaps not in our immediate area, can also impact how soon first responders might arrive. And it can also impact how the justice system is going to deal with you. So those are examples of how this systemic racism kind of happens. If anybody, if you have any idea about what redlining is, you might want to look at something like that. It's just, yeah.
Talk about what that is, just so people get a sense of within the mortgage loan.
Yeah, I mean,
what that would look like.
That's, well, not what it would look like. What it did look like is that there were just certain areas that if you selected these areas, you're not going to be able to get a housing loan.
And so, and you and I were talking about this the other day. Part of this, if I understand it, is when you look at your description of systemic racism and just thinking of the mortgage piece of it, there's this generational ripple effect,
right,
of someone owns a home, it appreciates,
right,
they sell, they buy another one, et cetera, and that is not available for those who can't get a loan.
Correct. And I don't. Maybe this is a good analogy. If you live in our area, or say the Bay Area, it's almost impossible for young people to
Yeah.
be able to afford a house.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
So you have to then change your life plan a little bit.
Right.
And, you know, well, anyway, that's an example of it. You just can't get enough to be able to afford into a market.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So another question came in. Again, I think it's representative of perhaps some people's perspective. It goes something like this. I realize racism still exists. I recognize it's a problem. I'm not diminishing the fact that it is a problem. But if we look at it from a historical perspective, aren't we as a nation making progress, at least, from where we once were?
By whose barometer are we making progress? If you're asking me, you know, am I supposed to be happy with the slow rate of progress? Is that what you're saying? Because I'm not okay with that. I mean,
You're getting in that mode there. You know, remember, I'm just like channeling these questions.
Listen, we were stolen from a continent, brought here and enslaved. And it's been 400 years of legal wrangling. And it hasn't been that many years since there came to be some kind of respectability given, at least with amendments, 13, 14, 15, that Black people have the equal rights that are written in our Constitution. And a lot of people have died trying to make progress. And a lot of people have suffered, and a lot of people have had put up with a lot that we would not want anybody that we love to have to go through. So if you're asking me, should I be pleased with our progress? No, I'm thankful for the progress, but I have no interest in people spoon feeding me progress.
Sure, right. Yeah, so in some ways, again, if I'm understanding what you're saying, the question itself, while well intended, is the privilege of a white person to ask.
Absolutely, it reeks of white privilege. Why aren't they happy? They got this, they got that. Isn't that good enough?
Good.
You know. Yeah.
So in the context of the text I read a moment ago from the person who wrote it in, they made reference to reverse racism. And I've heard this in various settings where people will say, well, there's reverse discrimination there, that's reverse racism, or for example, a white person talking about how they've experienced some sort of prejudicial moment or this reverse racism idea. So your thoughts on reverse racism?
Behind reverse racism is power. And once again, I feel like we are not looking to wield power to yank it from anybody. We are looking for equity here. So if there's a job available, let us both apply, Black and white, and the person who is most competent, available, should get the job.
Yeah.
And so this idea of reverse racism, I think that there's always going to be people who, if you want to find if you want people to agree with you, you'll find it. I don't necessarily buy it.
Say that again. That's an important thing.
I just said if you want to find someone or somebody to agree with you, you'll find it. It's out there. But I don't necessarily agree with some of this whole white anti-white bias. If you have power, then you don't have to worry about bias.
Yeah. You're
calling the shots. Right. So that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and maybe, and again, part of this whole evening is, and I'm gonna probably ask you something you're unaware I'm gonna ask you at some point. So I just thought of it actually, and I think it would potentially be helpful in this.
Mhm.
But some of this has to do, does it not, with, yeah, but this is what we're talking about, and this is why we're talking about it.
Right.
And just like there are in an interpersonal one-on-one relationship, it's very easy to kind of change the focus of the conversation because we don't like what it's implying. I hear some of that in some of this as well. The reverse racism, for example. Is that really, right now, a topic, a central topic worth grappling with? I don't know, that just strikes me as you're talking. So a lot of questions came in that were related to and were asking point blank. So Sharon, what are your personal experiences with racism?
So, you know, this is being broadcast, and so I'm really not up for sharing personal experiences online. But if anybody wants to talk to me about that, call the church office, and I would be very happy to share with you my own personal experiences as well as within my family. But I am not a fan of social media. I don't find it to be helpful. I find it to be actually the exact opposite of helpful. I don't think you can win people over by commenting, and I certainly don't think that you can win Christians over and make anybody a Christian through the internet. So yeah, I would love to talk to people, but I'm not going to do that in this forum.
Okay. Okay, so when we think about, for example, you talked about systemic racism and the effects that can have, the cyclical nature of it, the overlap of it, and so on. So here's a question that came in. What is the best thing that white Christians can do to begin to change the systemic culture of racism in our communities? Maybe more simply, we obviously in Folsom, this is a mostly white suburb. And for those of us who live here, so what do we do? Now what?
Well, I think I said it on the 28th. I think it's really important to get historical context, hear history from other narratives other than the ones that you're used to. I think we need to normalize race within our homes so that, you know, maybe you put a world map or a globe out there so your kids and you can see that it's a whole lot more to this world than just America. I think that if you are going out to eat or you're ordering in and you are buying Ecuadorian food or you know, wherever, you take the time to maybe learn something about a country or a culture and start to normalize differences, particularly when you're talking to your kids. So yeah, just so that you get an appreciation.
So as part of that, are there, I know we have this down the line a little bit, but are there resources related, for example, it's a streaming Netflix, Amazon Prime world. Are there documentaries you've discovered?
Absolutely.
To help in this?
Absolutely. So if you have Netflix or Amazon Prime, I would say watch The 13th. I would say James Baldwin's I Am Not Your Negro would be another great one. These are things that are hard to watch, but good for us. And even maybe make some notes while you're watching it, perhaps journal while you're watching it. I tend to go more towards documentaries where you're actually looking at real footage as opposed to movies. I'm sure there's some great movies out there. There are, but I don't want to have a Hollywood spin on things.
Sure.
I think you just look at real footage and you see, yeah.
What would your guidance be? Take the I Am Not Your Negro documentary. Julie and I watched that recently. What would your guidance be to someone who is wanting to learn on these things, but perhaps also has a resistance or a defensiveness or the whole idea is unsettling to them, and they're going to turn on a documentary like I Am Not Your Negro? How how would you counsel them in terms of how they watch that, what their posture is?
Well, I think when you start seeing real footage like that, it's hard to deny how horrible some of our history has been. And, it was hard for me to watch.
Mhm.
And I literally forced myself to, because it's important to understand that what we're looking at are real people. And a lot of that footage is happening, you're seeing inside churches, and one would think would be safe places. They're, people of faith, and you would think that they might be immune. And so I think what posture you take is you get a notebook and you start making notes, because when you watch these videos, there are names of people that we should know about. There are just certain situations coming through there. I think of things like Jim Crow or Black codes or Reconstruction. These are words that maybe you knew some time ago but don't know, we forgot. But some of those words, some of those things we can see how that has affected us to this day.
Mhm.
To this day.
Yeah.
And so when you watch those kinds of movies, or documentaries, not movies, then my hope is that you'll just get a sense of the outrage that some people feel, the pain that some people feel, the hurt and the frustration as we come to life in 2020.
Yeah. And it's interesting as you talk about, in response to this question of, so what do we do? One of your first steps, if you will, or suggestions, and I've heard you say this before, is, and correct me if I'm misstating this, but it's kind of a move toward it, even though it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Versus sometimes I know there's this idea that it's this massive overhaul tomorrow within a person. I'm not talking about the system, but just what do I do? And then people freeze over the massiveness of this. I've heard you in here, and I've heard you in other places. It's things like, watch this video and educate yourself. When the defensiveness rises, take some notes and look further into it. I've heard you also talk about the conversation. You said this a minute ago, just sitting down with somebody and having a conversation. Those are relatively, for a Christ follower,
mm-hmm.
those seem doable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And from your standpoint, that's good work in the right direction.
Absolutely, because what I have a question for you. I mean, it really is this.
Wait, we didn't rehearse this.
I know, but I know. But the question is, I have white friends who, are just saying, racism is real and it's wrong, it's a sin. And yet, I just see like this, why are white people angry? I don't understand that. What are you angry about? I mean, seriously.
Yeah. And angry in terms of what? That this issue's on the table?
That this issue is on the table. I've heard this before. I didn't own slaves. Why don't they just get over it? That's not my fault. Can we move on? You get your, college educations paid for. All of these. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I understand it either, though I'm certain that I'm not at all trying to suggest that I don't have things in me, I'm sure I do, that need to be transformed by God on this subject. So I'm not trying to put myself outside of a firsthand experience with those kinds of emotions. I think the fear of losing something is often behind that defensive or angry reaction.
Right. And so I would just push back to, or bring us back to Jesus Christ. I mean, this is not, what are we struggling for? Do you not think that we're going to be in heaven together? Mm-hmm. Do you think that he loves you more than me? When I look at you, I'm looking at an image of God. God created you. When you look at me, you should be looking at the same thing. Oh, please tell me you are. If we're looking at like, you're gonna be in the better part of heaven and I'm not, I mean, that's just absurd. So I think that we have to start to look at that. Am I looking at people as image bearers? Because God is, you know, God is the ultimate in leveling the playing field here. He cares about the poor, the black, the white, the brown. He cares about it all. So this power struggle thing, you know, we need to walk into that.
Yeah, and you know, we talked about this on the 28th. In addition to all the other things important in this discussion of racism for Christ followers and for a community of Christ followers, in this case Oak Hills, the racism has opened up a space for deeper discussions about spiritual formation.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is what you're talking about here, of we're stepping toward this, and it might be uncomfortable. I might be afraid. I might be afraid of losing. Just to expand on it, I might be afraid of losing. I think this is part of that fear. Am I going to lose my way of life? Am I going to lose power? Am I going to lose, and I don't even know its power. I just know I would call it my way of life. Am I going to lose that? Should I write you a check out of the equity I've got in my house? And again, it's just this rambling runaway train of, should I? What am I supposed to? And I think that devolves then into some of the sense of, just tell me what you want me to do, or and it kind of flashes out like that.
Yeah, I would just love for people to just enter into conversation where we can talk about these things and get beyond fear and concern. And when you personalize it, when you have a person sitting across from you and you start off with, we're both Christ followers, we both love God, God loves us both, then I just feel like that's a great place to have these kinds of difficult conversations.
You talk about what that unsettledness you feel when you have seen in some of these documentaries Black people up in the balcony of the church, white people down on the floor.
I mean, what is that? What is that?
Yeah.
I mean, if you do any kind of study on even the history of the church in America, the church has been complicit in a lot of that, in a lot of the segregations, and they've been very quiet in places of calling out what's wrong and have instead gone with status quo. So when there were things, particularly like in the civil rights movement, if you've ever read, and I suggest you do, a letter from a Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King Jr., he's writing that letter to fellow clergymen, and he's expressing his disappointment of, I'm expecting you guys to come alongside me. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, we agree racism is a sin. And so where is whites in this? Mm-hmm. If you are agreeing that, racism is wrong, then where are you? Yeah. I cannot even tell you when I went to that Folsom demonstration, mm-hmm. and I just saw so many young people there. I was so encouraged by that. And I saw obviously it's in Folsom, so there's more white people, but that too was an encouragement to me. Because I think, we need to know that we're not just doing this alone, that you think that this is wrong too. Yeah. Good. There's something that is good for both of us, Black and white, to just lock arms and say, hey, this is not right. This is not Christ-like. Let's just stop this now. Let's do what we can do to honor God. And this is the other thing I want to say. You know, I'm an American. This is my country too. I care about it, and I want it to be a better place for me, for my kids, for my grandkids, and for future generations. And so I just feel like the church should be rising up right now. This is our duty as Christ followers. Lock arms, Oak Hills, those people who call Oak Hills church, no matter where you are politically or whatever, wrong is wrong, sin is sin, lock arms, join other churches in our community, and let's represent Jesus well in trying to change. It's crazy out there. And every day, it's just more and more of this division that, you know, it's our job. It's our job. And I said this on the 28th. We are to be Jesus's hands, his feet, his mouth, his, you know, that's us, those of us who call ourselves Christ followers. So even if we don't completely agree with anything that I've said or that you've said tonight, we still serve Christ. Right. And we can do that. We can serve him and not be completely on the same page. Good. Not if we have Jesus.
That's good. That's good. You're preaching.
I am.
That's good.
I may take an offering.
You were really good. That's great. So you mentioned a couple times in the last few minutes this idea of Jim Crow laws, historical racial inequality, slavery, etc. And there are some folks who, when these things come up, they struggle with feeling anything about that, or certainly feeling any responsibility about it, because sometimes the argument goes, well, I wasn't there, I didn't own slaves, I didn't have, you know, I don't support Jim Crow laws, etc. So in that whole realm of accepting responsibility for the actions of people who have gone before us, and related, this idea of, I don't know, sometimes it even goes to the idea of, you know, I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. What do you say to that?
Now, others might feel differently, but personally, I'm not looking for an apology. I would like at least, you know, an acknowledgement that these things happen, because believe it or not, there are still people who don't think that racism exists, you know. So I think that, you know, you need to at least acknowledge that it exists. Obviously, you're not going to experience it. And you're going, I hope, are going to do what you can to stop some of those systems. So what could that look like from a practical point of view? As I was talking about, you know, problems with, and I'm a strong believer in education. So, you know, get involved in, you know, reading programs. And even though, you know, we're in the middle of this pandemic situation, there's all kinds of creative ways that you can still help. The need is there, particularly as we're trying to figure out schools and such. So, you know, there could be things that you can do to who you shop from, or, you know, where you shop, where you buy, how you buy. You know, we might need to be better consumers and give some thought. It's like when you let's say, when we shop from the fair trade market, for instance, when we have it at church.
Christmas time.
Yeah. So you are buying things that give dignity to the hands that made these things. And so you might be able to buy a book from through Amazon and get it in 2 days, but why not support a business instead? Buy locally. All of those things, you know, you just start to be a better, smarter, kinder consumer.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and we probably all said this to our kids, you know, it's not always good to get your way. Right. You know, sometimes you need to wait for things. And so why not start to be a little bit more of a conscientious consumer?
Okay. You mentioned, I'm not looking for an apology. Just to follow up on that, real succinctly, someone says, well, then what are you looking for?
I would say I'm looking for people who are not going to deny my experience, who are not going to, want me to give examples of how I've experienced racism, so that, I don't know, so they can justify that I've actually experienced racism. I'm looking for people who aren't going to blow me off, that, I should get over it. That's one of those things that really personally bug me.
To get over it?
To get over it, and can we move on?
Tell me why. Why does that bother you?
Because it discounts my family's existence and struggle and hard work.
Related to what you just said, there was a question around the idea, both from those who care about these issues and are advocates for racial equality and social justice, but I know it goes to those who maybe don't as much as well. What do people do and say that perhaps well-meaning, but it contributes to the problem, or it's not helping in this whole conversation? You just mentioned one, the get over it stuff. What are some of the things, if you can think of any, that people say or do or don't say or don't do, that either passively or actively perpetuate the problem?
You're probably gonna hear about this later, but this is one of those things that just ran through my mind. People who think blackface is funny, people who think wearing Afro wigs is a funny thing, that's actually quite insulting.
Keep going. Because why?
Because there's a disrespect of my history in that. I cannot tell you how many times, let me just say this. I'm a Black person who feels for any minority, which that's another word, we can talk about that in a second, for other people of color. Don't tell me jokes about other ethnicities. That's also, I am, as I've gotten older, just bolder about not okay with me.
Is that what you do?
I do now.
With that left hand?
Or my face, yeah, not okay.
Okay, stopping it right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's people that will say things that are inappropriate, and sometimes they're family members and such, and we are, afraid to respond to that. And I get that. There's family dynamics and things, but at least at this point in my life, I'm really at that place where I feel very comfortable just nipping that immediately. And just as this other thing in terms of minority and that word, and I know this is just a thing, I know there are people who will roll their eyes and just say it's semantics and it was a word and whatever, but just think about that. To refer to a person as a minority, what's the root word? Minor. What does that mean? Less than, right? Minor versus major. I mean, it's those little microaggressions that are just out there that it may be for us who are older, it's not such a big deal because we have a little bit more of life experience under us, but what is that message that we're sending to our kids when we just use those kinds of words? And I understand, I've heard this also, this kind of, what is it, politically correct. And again, this eye roll. But there's a place for some of these things, and that's a museum. That some things that maybe were okay, they're not okay. And even if they were okay 10 years ago or 20, they're not okay. So I am off topic, but just as an example, because it's in the news right now, and it's another one of those things that people roll their eyes about, and that's a lot of the discussion, football, gotta throw in football.
Yeah, you gotta throw that.
A lot of discussion about the Washington Redskins. And if I'm a Native American, I don't want to be called a Redskin, period. So maybe there was a time, although I doubt there was ever a time, but maybe there was a time for the Washington Redskins to call themselves the Redskins, but now we're done. It's past now. Just get over it.
And so you're saying, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it is, by definition, I think what you're saying is, it's the privilege that allows for the eye rolling about these things.
Right. I mean, there are people behind there,
Right.
you know, and much of our American history
Yes.
is right foundationally within Native Americans. So, you know, it's just not appropriate.
So two follow-ups to this.
Yes.
How does someone who might be listening to this, and again, they want to grow in this, they want Jesus to continue to transform them in this area, but one of the thoughts in their mind is something like this: I feel like I'm getting more and more afraid to open my mouth and say anything, because somebody is bound to be microaggressed, harmed, or otherwise offended by what comes out of my mouth. And how do I live like that?
Well, many of us have been living like that our whole lives. But I would say that the first thing starts with communication. Certain things you cannot discuss just a bunch of white people discussing something, or, you know, a bunch of anything. You have to venture out into the deep, into the different, and start to ask questions, do research, Google it, you know, but be bold and just say, you know, what's the best. When I met with staff, when somebody asked me about, you know, how best do I do this, you know, I can't buy I'm afraid to say anything. Come on, we're grown-ups here, you know, speak.
But again, the person on the other side is going, yeah, that's the point though, Sharon. Aren't we all grown-ups? So don't we all know that I don't really mean this, and this is just maybe I slip up here and there and I speak politically incorrectly,
right.
But it's starting to feel like I'm in a maze, and every 18 inches it turns again, and everything's like this, and it's lacking fluidity. So that's kind of the point is, aren't we sort of grown up here? Is this really necessary? Your response, they're sitting here and they're saying this to you, no one else is here. They're saying this to you, you're having coffee with them, and they say that to you. Well, how do you respond to that?
I would say, let's continue to be friends. Let's continue to talk, and you would get to know me, and you would feel more comfortable with some of these terms, and I would feel more comfortable with explaining things to you. I don't think you can, you know, I mean, what you're saying is, I'm afraid to offend you, so I don't know what to say, so I'm not going to say anything.
I'm afraid to offend all kinds of people.
Right.
So,
right.
I don't know. You heard this stuff. I mean, people. It's the eye rolling. It's oh my goodness. It's
right.
You know, and so you're coming back to though the importance of relationship and
absolutely
being present.
Listen, when we talk about the values at Oak Hills, community is one of them.
Yeah.
Community is not just hand holding and getting along.
Yeah.
Community is being able to mix it up and just say, hey, I still love you. We don't agree, you know, but you know, we want to talk about it.
That's
we
good.
Want to football and
Yep.
want to move the ball a little bit
Down the
further
field.
down.
I don't really know what that means, but I love that you're talking like that. The another offshoot of that is this is our Christian church, our community for the most part watching this, and we've been talking about this for a long time, long years in some cases. What do you say to a small group where they're having their group and person A, and you know, there's people in the group, and person A hears person B say something like you're mentioning, or imply something, or person A knows person B regularly puts things on social media, and person A is bothered by it because they care about this subject. help person A, who's a Christ follower, what do they do? How do they interact with person B, who's a Christ follower and who's part of Oak Hills? What should happen there, do you think?
Let me see if I track that. Person B puts things on social media. Person A doesn't like what they
don't like it. It's not they don't like it. They find it offensive. They find it racially offensive. It reeks of racism. It might be posting an article that just has it.
The question is, you know, is it honoring to God? Is really
should person A feel? Is it person A's responsibility to interact with person B about that?
Well, you're in a small group. I hope you're being authentic with each other. So, I mean, you don't have to call the person out in front of the whole group, but it would be, you know, like, you know, what were you trying to achieve by putting that out there? And was that honoring God in that? And, you know, ongoing dialogue, I just don't think that social media is.
So the ongoing dialogue, the face-to-face, the moving toward those who are different, these are themes I'm hearing you talk about. Not just huddling up with those who all think the same way, moving out toward others.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, another question it reads as follows. Is racial righteousness and racial reconciliation really possible after all these years? Say it differently. After so many years of whites playing their role and blacks playing their role, isn't there a decreasing chance either will be able to move beyond being racist or being the victims of racism? Are we stuck in our labels and in our identities and no amount of effort's gonna move it?
Oh my goodness, I hope not, Mike. I mean, that's why we're talking about this tonight. That's what our job is to do, is to move us off of that. Is it easy? Of course not. It is so complex, but just because it's complex doesn't mean we sit where we sit. I mean, it's like the systemic racism thing. You can believe in it or not, but there are certain things that are placed that we need to improve on.
Right.
So let's find out what are those things that need to be improved on. What can we do there?
Got it. Good.
Yeah.
Suggestions for families with small children and how they enter this topic and process it together.
Well, I think again, you know, you for small children, you normalize differences so that you bring in books, dolls, stuffed animals, whatever, not stuffed animals, dolls, you know, that they're curious about, this intellectual curiosity. There's so much at our fingertips, Mike. We should not be living in bubbles. We just shouldn't. We should be able to, I mean, I said something about Ecuadorian food and Cody's like, oh my goodness, why? Because we can enjoy another culture. I'm not cooking Ecuadorian food. So, I mean, we start to enjoy and appreciate others, you know?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I mean, the first time I went to get sushi, this was many, many, many years ago in San Francisco, and I went with somebody who just kind of walked me through it. On my own, I didn't know what I was doing. Walking with someone who does this, eats this regularly, it was this wonderful experience, and I haven't been the same since. So you start to just appreciate the difference and not be afraid of it. If there was things maybe on that plate that I would have like, yeah, no, but by just somebody talking to me about it, it opened up my mind.
Yeah, and so you keep coming back to, and I've heard you did this on the 28th, you did it with the staff, you keep revolving back into good starting points of relationship, conversation, and not being afraid of that which is different.
Correct.
And moving toward that which is different.
Absolutely. It's enriching. You know, I mean, you know, including other people, I really feel is just, we're seeing glimpses of heaven.
Yeah, that's good.
It's glimpses of heaven.
It's hard not to love that. Yeah. So there are, as you know, there are African American intellectuals, Candace Owens, Thomas Sowell, John McWhorter, others, who write articles, write books, give talks, and they would watch that. They wouldn't watch this, but if they did watch this, they would have much to say pushing against all of this. And so how do you respond? What do you say about that?
Okay, so I've actually had several O'Killians who have sent me articles by some of these folks, and I would say this: the richer thing to do is not to try to have people defend your take on things, because the purpose of this evening is to bring us together. I'm not trying to defend how I feel. I'm trying to at least show people another way of thinking about a situation. So when we hear about some of these people that you're mentioning, I don't know what their agenda is. I don't know if they're trying to sell books. I don't know what they're doing. But to me, and I keep saying this, go establish a friendship with someone else who is different from you in some kind of way, and talk and learn about their life experience. And that, to me, is far more important than any statistic that Candace Owens is going to give me.
You mentioned, and you alluded to it tonight as well, I know you've said in other settings something to the effect of, if you want to confirm what you're already thinking, it's not hard to do.
Correct. But there is nothing like breaking bread with people.
Good.
And so we literally once a month break bread with each other. And I think it's important to bring that communion table in front of this discussion.
Extend it into these kinds of conversations. Yeah, that's good.
We're trying. The purpose of this evening is not for us to be like this. It's for us to go, we're different, but we can still be like this because we have that.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
so Candace Owens and some of those other folks, those are opinions, but they're not. I just don't think that we should be trying to defend things with statistics and stuff. Defend it here.
Right.
Defend it here.
Yeah. There is you're talking about there, if I'm hearing you, there's a dismissing of the experience that an actual person has had when you're rolled up into a statistic that no longer has a name or a face.
Correct. So instead of going, sending me an email, an article that someone has written, why not send me an article or send me an invitation for a Zoom meeting, and let's just talk
about it.
And recognize, if you don't know me, I'm not going to bash you. I'm curious I want to get behind the thinking of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about us and God. I don't want to talk about statistics and I'm wrong or you're right or you're wrong and I'm right. I don't want to do all of that.
Yeah. So you have referenced this many times, the 28th being a superb example of how you ground or are trying to ground your processing of racism in your faith and in your convictions about who Jesus is and what you're called to as someone who lives in his kingdom. Can you talk about how your faith, and I don't even want to say faith, how your commitment to follow Jesus how it shapes your ideas about racism and your convictions about this, about how to handle it, how not to handle it, etc.?
Right. So, I don't want to be angry. I'm frustrated about some things and all of that, but I recognize that, you know, by the grace of God, you know, he's forgiven me for all kinds of things. And some of those things are even in this last month, I've seen, you know, I haven't worked certain things out yet, but I feel like God can still use me even in my brokenness. And as long as I am willing to just acknowledge that there's some broken pieces in me that need some sanding down, I don't need more of the world in that. I need more of Jesus in that.
Yeah.
So I want to be a better person, and that means I have access to the ultimate way to live. I have access to that. So I'm trying to, when I feel this, I'm trying to just pray about that stuff, acknowledge it right then and there, and just go, you know, the easiest prayer is help.
Yeah.
You know? So I can't, and I said this on the 28th, I can't have all of this racism stuff be here and my faith be here. It doesn't work. It's fake and phony. And I don't want to do that. I want to be a person where my faith is covering everything. I can't be a hater and call myself a Christian.
Yeah, you're talking about you can't be a hater, even in these occasions where there's a lot of tension and a lot of.
Yeah.
Those are great words, Sharon. Again, we're in rapid fire mode here.
Yes.
You talk, I keep writing new ones down. So we're off script for sure here. We'll get back to it. But you've mentioned this, alluded to it a couple times. I want to ask you point blank, and I want to invite you not to edit. What is it that is making you angry, or what has made you angry and frustrated over the past however long about this issue?
Oh, okay. One is I just thought that we were further along than we are. And this last month has revealed in a lot of ways that when I say we, our country. So that makes me sad. I don't know if it's anger. There's probably some anger in there too. I'm disappointed that some of the important issues are being lost because of other things, like, you know, some of the looting and some of those things that are helping no one and are taking the focus off of what we've got right in front of us in terms of racism and how to deal with that.
So in other words, you're saying that some of the violence that has radiated out from this is not helping.
No, of course not. No, of course not. You know, nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to get their property torn up and all those kinds of things.
You had mentioned in another setting, and I just think this is such a profound thing that you have said. Tell everybody about your statement and your invitation regarding the questions that we as a white person might feel embarrassed to ask someone. You know where I'm going with this? Those questions that maybe we think about. We've tried to bring some of these out tonight, but somebody who might be in our congregation who has some questions, but they're afraid if they ask someone, if they ask a black person, if they ask you, you're going to think, what an idiot. Or so there's an insecurity that some folks may have with the questions they're holding. They don't know what to do with those questions. You talked about this. I'm leading you along.
Yeah, I'm not tracking with you.
Remember, in the staff, you told the staff, if you have some of those questions, I'm a place you can bring those questions.
Well, I mean, I've had, you can tell me if this is what you mean. I mean, I've had people who have asked me things like, you know, what should I call you? Are you Black? Are you African American? And I think you take the lead from people in that regard, and ask them. We talked about this on the 28th. I think there's just ways to just go, look, I don't really know what to say, so I don't mean to offend you, but I'm just going to throw it out there, and I'm going to trust in our friendship that you won't get offended by that, and you will tell me, you know.
And you're okay. You are okay with people who have those. I don't know what to do. Can I ask Sharon that question? Can I say to Sharon, I heard you talk about systemic racism. I'm still not getting it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have presented yourself as someone who, if you're having a question, I'd rather you ask me and I won't be offended by it,
right,
than feel like you've got nowhere to go with it.
Right. And that's absolutely right, because, not everybody's in the same place. So some people might be offended by you asking that question. And so I've said, I am way okay. Ask me the question. I'm not going to roll my eyes or get upset, because I want us to feel comfortable with talking about race. We have to, because it's dividing our nation, and none of us want that.
Yeah.
So we can't keep skirting around these things. So if you don't know what to ask or how to ask me. I'll be kind and gentle.
Good.
Well,
maybe
I'll be
not.
kind.
You'll be kind.
I'll be gentle.
You'll try.
I'll
How
try.
about that? What about books you've read?
Yeah.
Or other resources?
Yeah.
Just a couple for people who are going, I want to know more about this. I want to read about this, specifically read about it.
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
I mean, there's so many books out there that are really, really good and really, really challenging. And I think Reconstructing the Gospel is a great one. Let's see, I've got so many.
Do you know who that's by? Or a last name at least?
No, but I bet somebody can find that for me.
Indeed, we do.
That's a great one. There's some that I think. I mean, I'm reading. Be the Bridge.
Uh-huh.
I think that's a good one. I mean, I think it's important to try and stick with some church Christian kinds of authors at this point. That's kind of a great way to start to get your, Jonathan Wilson. Hargrove is who wrote Reconstructing the Gospel. I think that Be the Bridge is a good one. I am trying to think of all the books that are in my room.
Sure.
And I'm kind of drawing a blank.
How about one other one? What about, what was the one, the Be the Bridge? There was another one that, the Mending the Divide.
Oh, yes, that's a great one. Mending the Divides. I actually think that would be a good one. Just kind of putting your toe in. That would be a good one.
Okay, so we're kind of coming down to it here a little bit. And like we've talked about, you root a lot of this in your faith. So,
yes.
Question,
yes.
What does a church like Oak Hills look like in your mind that is racially reflecting God's shalom?
That is a great question. And I have to say, if you last Sunday you said a prayer. It was a bold prayer. And it was a prayer that said you wanted us to have more people of different cultures come into our church and be part of our church. And I was like, man, I really hope people are joining in on this prayer and not feeling uncomfortable with that prayer, because difference expands our hearts. And so to some degree, I really do feel like our church is reflective of the Oak Hills Folsom community. But I would love for us to be able to maybe make connections with other churches, and not just as invite them, but actually develop relationships with them. I think that one of the things that we could do to get there is to get more comfortable with race, conversations, and difference. And so we don't, just by how we posture ourselves, we don't make people feel uncomfortable when they come into our lives.
What does that look like?
I think that, you don't make assumptions about people. I mean, again, this is just one of those things that just kind of run through my mind, but, there's nothing more painful than hearing someone white say, "Hey, soul brother," that kind of stuff. You just have to kind of know, that you are loving them and seeing them as another Christ follower, somebody that we're going to be hanging with in heaven, versus, "Hey, you're different and I'm going to go out of my way and make myself look foolish in that process." So we're going to be comfortable with difference, so it doesn't stand out like that. But you see people, like, again, as image bearers.
And so that's a really practical filter for you that you've mentioned several times, is developing this filter of seeing others as image bearers of God.
Right.
In the context of, for yourself, if you were walking in someplace where you experienced the comfort you're talking about, comfortable with difference, can you describe that in terms of thinking of Oak Hills, thinking of seeking to continue to be transformed in this? You're pointing your finger, you're putting your finger on this idea of more at ease with the difference. What does a culture like that feel like? What's happening or not happening? How would you describe that as you're walking in and feeling this place is comfortable with that?
Yeah. So I think, and we do it sometimes here at Oak Hills. We experiment with prayer and experiment with music sometime. I think we could go further into that. No matter who comes, just trying out some other ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think at one point Dan Moss did some breathing prayer. That's not everybody's comfortable with that. Maybe it brings us out a little bit more than we're comfortable with, but it's good for us.
Mm-hmm.
We've done that in even like Sunday, this idea of speaking worship, speaking those lyrics. No, it wasn't the same.
Sure.
But when you start to speak lyrics, then it almost is more like a prayer, and then it becomes something else. So I think we would be wise to just try just push out a little bit in some of our worship and how we approach prayer, and
Do you think we do? I'm not looking to be affirmed. I'm not looking for a church to be affirmed. If anything, to the contrary, I'm looking for you to bring your Queens, New York attitude, mm-hmm. and bring that to these responses. How do you think we are? Do you think we do a good job at Oak Hills cultivating that kind of welcome and that kind of ease with people who come in who are different?
I think that we do pretty good. I think that there are people within our church body that are incredible at that. And I've seen it myself happen, where they are incredibly welcoming, and they have that face that says, "Talk to me," that kind of a thing that can put people at ease. I could name off names, I won't. They know who they are, but some really great people that are very visible in the lobby that are really, really good at that. And I think that we do a good job, if you're listening, of trying to empower our Oak Hillians to own more of their faith. And I think that is really important. It's great to have our Sunday worship, our Sunday service, but it's, we're Christians throughout the week. And so the encouragement to live out your life every day of the week is something that I think we really have done a real good job with. And I just think of how, for example, how our homeless ministry has grown, And I certainly remember many years ago some resistance, but I think um, uh, as we start to work within, say, the homeless community, you start to see that they're people, they're image bearers, that there's something maybe that happened in their life that may have been their fault or maybe it wasn't, but here they sit. And so you look at them with respect and remember that they matter too. They matter to Jesus, so they should matter to us. And I think that would be a real way that we have seen the church change and care and love on people.
And in terms of the Oak Hills, our Oak Hills family and our Oak Hills culture and me and others who are leaders, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of improving and continuing to grow in this, if you have any ideas?
I'd like to see some more diversity in our music, and I don't necessarily mean diversity on stage, because who we have is who we have, but different kinds of music perhaps push us a little bit in that area. I think it really is important to just challenge us to live our lives out more in other ways. I'd like to see us raise the value of younger people, give our young adults more of a voice. I think about just, I'm just getting tired. I mean, I'm just getting tired. I'd like to see young people have, I don't want to say young people, young adults, young families have more visibility and more of a voice in what we're doing here.
Yeah.
I think there's value in our wisdom, but the young adults, young families have a different energy, and they're just more comfortable with social media, not social media, but with communications overall, and are just, they just are thinking differently, and that's good.
Good.
We have to be not afraid of that difference.
You have talked, you have talked before on the 28th about the cultural learning group.
Yes.
There could be people watching, they've heard about the cultural learning group.
Yes.
They're listening to this, they listened to you on the 28th. Something's churning in them around this.
Yes.
Talk about the cultural learning group for those who might be interested in the next step in this process.
Okay, so we have done 3 of them. It started with Alison Carlos. It was kind of her vision to bring people together with from all kinds of differences. Again, whether it is race or age or economics or all kinds of differences. I'll leave it at that. And we sat with each other and listened to different experiences and how they experienced each other. How we experienced them was that they shared with us their life, a life experience that was meaningful to them, that would help us and give us insight into a culture perhaps that we're not familiar with. And that has been, we've had over 40 people who have gone through that. We typically do that in the fall and in the spring. With COVID now, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it because it's important. It's important to hear the stories of other people. And I just want to say this too. We can learn from white people too. I mean, it doesn't have to be just all these different races, but it just is a beautiful thing when you really see people coming together and hearing another person's story, seeing themselves in it or not, but just sharing in that experience. And some of my great examples is just I'm richer because I got to hear another person's story that I knew anything about this. And as a result, I'm more empathetic.
Yeah. And we have talked about this many times, and you were mentioning this earlier, the communion table extended.
Yes.
The shalom, the agents of shalom. And of course, so much of the passion for talking about race and talking about it under the umbrella of our faith and under the umbrella of the kingdom is because we want to be, as a faith community, agents of shalom and a picture of shalom. And the cultural learning group, there's a little slice of that in there, of all these differences and people listening and modeling that.
Correct. And so when the last 2 times we did it, I literally had a communion table there. And so it was really important to me that we had that. So when we start to hear things or things that we're not comfortable with or whatever, what do we have in common? Jesus. And so all of a sudden, it's just like, all right, let me remember that they're his too.
Yeah. Good. So I want to wrap up, Sharon, but is there anything else that hasn't come in the form of a question, something you want to say or have felt, or any kind of closing remarks before we wrap this up?
I think that my closing remark is, regardless of what you've heard tonight, our marching orders are to be peacemakers. And that's important to me, that you can agree or disagree with what I said or what you said, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is be the best people, the best citizens, and be ambassadors of Christ. And that is really important to me, that's what people are taking away. That when this is over, they're not on their laptops trying to prove you right or me wrong or whatever, but they're going, you know what? My faith should be enough to bring some of this muck and mire and mess. I should be able to bring some peace into that. And maybe for you, for me, that's just one relationship. But then let's just start with one relationship.
Yeah. Those are good words. And I would emphasize those words and also say, and it is the community of us together as a witness in the world of the different and better way of the kingdom. The church as a proclamation of shalom, and we've been talking about it tonight, a proclamation of shalom in the realm of racism, declaring the goodness and the greatness of God through our witness to shalom and our anti-racist posture. And so I know this is incredibly vulnerable. You've been doing a lot of this lately. I've told you this in one-on-one. I've said it publicly. You have led us and are continuing to lead us so well in this. So I know you're putting yourself out there, and we thank you for that, because it's leading us into places we need to go for Christ to be formed in us. So thank you for tonight. And I mentioned this is an ongoing discussion we're going to have. We have a plan right now to have something like this. It won't necessarily be Sharon and I each time, but we are going to have a monthly forum like this, August, September, October, November, for starters, once a month, where we're going to have some kind of conversation with some group of people on this subject, and continue to press into this and continue to speak truth to each other in love, if you will, in the hopes of continuing to transform ourselves individually and transform as a faith community on this topic. So you will hear more. We're going to send out an email to everybody who registered for this and signed up for this that will give you some of these resources Sharon had mentioned. We'll list them so you can get them if you want them. We'll list out, once we finalize them, the specific dates when we're going to reconvene and continue the discussion. If you are interested in the cultural learning group, can they email you or contact us?
Yeah, contact the church office, and I'll get it.
Good.
And I will get back.
Good. So if you're interested in the cultural learning group, of finding out more about that as another way to press into this, let us know at the church office, and we'll get your name out to Sharon. So again, this is an ongoing conversation, an ongoing process of transformation. We're grateful that you joined us tonight. And before we wrap up, I'd like to say a prayer. So let's pray together. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, almighty, everlasting, triune, marvelous, wonderful, King of kings, Lord of lords, wonderful God of all things. We are thankful for this opportunity to reflect on things that matter tonight, to press into them a bit. We thank you for your Holy Spirit and for being our teacher, our guide, our counselor, for not giving up on us, continuing to transform us. And we continue to pray for we as people here at Oak Hills, as this church at this time, in this community, that we will continue to grow toward becoming a community of people who proclaim shalom through our love for one another, our unity in our differences, our togetherness, our willingness to walk into hard things, our willingness to walk toward uncomfortable things. We pray that the marvelous mystery of your communion table would extend into our homes, into our relationships, that the reconciliation we have received from you through Jesus Christ, that reconciliation, the depth and extreme of that reconciliation would flow through us as we reach out in this fractured and broken world. And we do pray, God, we pray fervently that you would bring people of other ethnicities to our congregation, bring people who are different than we are in every way, but those who love you and want to follow you and serve you as King. We pray that you will continue to grow us as a people and as a church, that our togetherness and unity and love for each other would declare and proclaim the goodness of your kingdom and the righteousness of our King. And so we ask for this and we continue to pray for this, that in real ways you will hear our prayer and make this so. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.